There's a building in downtown Los Angeles that doesn't look like much from the outside. 14 stories of beige concrete and fading paint, standing on a corner where the streets smell of exhaust and old memories. But if you ask anyone who knows the city's darker history, they'll tell you that this place, this ordinary-looking hotel, has seen more tragedy than any building should ever witness. They call it the Cecil Hotel. Some call it Hotel Death. On a cold morning in February 2013, a maintenance worker climbed a ladder to the roof. Guests had been complaining for days. The water tasted wrong. It came out dark and smelled like something rotting. The pressure was weak, barely a trickle from the taps. He reached the top of the building and walked toward 4 large water tanks, each one standing 8 feet tall. When he opened the heavy lid of the first tank and looked inside, he saw something floating in the water. At first he thought it was fabric. Then he realized it was a person. A young woman, face up, naked, suspended in the water that hundreds of guests had been drinking, showering in, brushing their teeth with for nearly 3 weeks. Her name was Elisa Lam. She was 21 years old, a Canadian student who had checked into the Cecil Hotel on a solo trip down the West Coast. She had vanished without a trace 19 days earlier. Police had searched everywhere. Dogs had sniffed through hallways and stairwells. Her face had been plastered on flyers all over downtown. But no one thought to look inside the water tanks on the roof. No one imagined that's where she would be found. When the news broke, the story went viral across the world. Not just because of where her body was discovered, but because of a video. Security camera footage from inside one of the hotel's elevators. In it, Elisa moves in strange ways, pressing buttons frantically, stepping in and out of the elevator, looking down the hallway as if hiding from something unseen. Her hands move in odd gestures. She seems to be speaking to someone who isn't there. The elevator doors stay open far longer than they should, as if the building itself is watching, waiting. Millions of people watched that video. Theories exploded online. Was she being chased? Was she possessed? Was someone else in that elevator with her? The Cecil Hotel had become the center of one of the internet's most haunting mysteries. But for those who knew the building's history, there was something grimly familiar about the story. Because Elisa Lam wasn't the first person to meet a tragic end inside those walls. She wasn't even close. To understand how a hotel became synonymous with death, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to a time when downtown Los Angeles was booming with ambition, and the Cecil Hotel was someone's beautiful dream. It was 1924. The Roaring Twenties were in full swing. Los Angeles was exploding with growth. Oil had been discovered beneath the city. Hollywood was becoming the center of the film world. People poured in from across the country, chasing fortune and fame under the California sun. Downtown was the heart of it all. Main Street buzzed with energy. Banks, theaters, hotels, department stores, everything a modern city needed. And 3 businessmen, William Banks Hanner, Charles Dix, and Robert Shops, saw an opportunity. They wanted to build a hotel that would cater to business travelers and tourists. Something grand but affordable. A place that would capture the spirit of the times. They hired an architect named Loy Lester Smith, a man who had already made a name for himself designing elegant buildings across Southern California. Smith was born in Pomona in 1885, and he understood the language of beauty. For the Cecil Hotel, he chose the Beaux Arts style, the same architectural tradition that gave the world the Paris Opera House and the New York Public Library. His design featured a 14-story building with an unusual E-shaped floor plan, allowing natural light and air to flow through every room. He drew plans for 700 guest rooms, A grand marble lobby, stained glass windows, potted palms, and alabaster statues. Everything about it screamed elegance. Construction took 3 years and cost between $1 and $1.5 million, an enormous sum for the time, worth nearly $30 million today. The Weymouth Crowell Company built it, laying reinforced concrete floor by floor, shaping terracotta ornaments by hand, installing 2 elevators manufactured by the Otis Elevator Company. The building rose 14 stories into the Los Angeles sky, its E-shaped floor plan creating natural corridors of light and air. This wasn't just aesthetic. In an era before modern air conditioning, the design allowed breezes to flow through the building, keeping rooms comfortable even during hot California summers. The terracotta ornamentation included decorative quoins on the corners, elaborate cornices along the roofline, and ornate surrounds for windows and doors. Columns and pilasters added vertical elegance to the facade. The roofline featured a projecting, denticulated cornice that created dramatic shadows when the sun hit it just right. When the doors finally opened on December 20th, 1924, it was a sensation. The lobby glowed with polished marble. Sunlight streamed through stained glass. Business travelers checked in. Tourists marveled at the craftsmanship, and the hotel quickly became a fixture of downtown life. Rooms with a shared bath cost $1.50 per night. Private toilets went for $2. A room with a private bath, pure luxury, cost $2.50. The hotel even received a gift of 700 Gideon Bibles in 1925, one for every room. Everything seemed perfect. The Cecil Hotel was exactly what its creators had envisioned, a place of promise. But Los Angeles is a city where dreams and nightmares often live side by side. The hotel sat just a few blocks from an area that was already beginning to change. Immigrants, transients, and those down on their luck were gathering in the streets nearby. What would later be known as Skid Row was taking shape. At first, it didn't matter. The Cecil had everything going for it. It was close to the railway lines along Main Street, convenient for businessmen heading to the Spring Street financial district. Theater lovers stayed there when they attended shows at the nearby Broadway theaters. In 1932, visitors to the Los Angeles Olympics filled the rooms. Everything was going according to plan. Until it wasn't. January 22nd, 1927. Just over 3 years after the grand opening. A man named Percy Ormond Cook checked into a room at the Cecil Hotel. He was 52 years old, a real estate dealer from Providence, Rhode Island. He had been separated from his wife and son for several months. The loneliness had been eating at him. He had spent $40,000 in the past 6 months, trying to buy happiness, traveling, spending, searching for something to fill the emptiness inside. Nothing worked. That night, Percy Cook sat down and wrote 2 letters. One was addressed to his wife. The other was addressed to the press. In it, he wrote that money could not buy happiness. He had tried. He had failed. Then he picked up a gun and pulled the trigger. When hotel staff found him, he was still breathing, but barely. They rushed him to the hospital. He died before the night was over. Percy Cook became the Cecil Hotel's first recorded death. The newspapers covered it. His note to the press made sure of that. It should have been a tragic but isolated incident. But it wasn't. Over the next few years, something began to shift, not just in the hotel, but in the world around it. In October 1929, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression swept across America like a cold wind. Fortunes evaporated overnight. Banks failed. Businesses closed. People lost their homes, their jobs, their hope. Downtown Los Angeles, once so vibrant, began to decline. The grand hotels and fancy stores couldn't escape the economic collapse. Slowly, the area surrounding the Cecil Hotel transformed. More and more people without homes gathered on the streets. Crime increased. Desperation became visible on every corner. What had once been a fashionable neighborhood was turning into something darker. The Cecil Hotel tried to adapt. It had to. With fewer wealthy travelers, the management began offering long-term housing. Rates dropped. Instead of tourists staying for a night or two, the hotel became home to people who couldn't afford anywhere else. The rooms filled with a different kind of guest. People who were struggling. People who had nowhere else to go. People who came to the Cecil Hotel not because they wanted to, but because they had run out of options. And some of those people brought their darkest moments with them. In 1931, a man named W.K. Norton checked into the Cecil. He was a fugitive on the run, cornered by circumstances. One day, hotel staff found him in his room. He had swallowed poison capsules. He left no note. He simply decided he'd had enough. In July 1934, Army Medical Corps Sergeant Louis Borden, 53 years old, was found in his room. He had taken a razor to his own throat. He left several notes behind, explaining that poor health had made life unbearable. In March 1937, a woman named Grace Magro fell from a 9th-floor window. On her way down, she hit telephone wires that wrapped around her body like a deadly embrace. She died shortly after reaching the hospital. Police couldn't determine if it was an accident or something she intended. Her companion, a sailor named M.W. Madison, had been asleep. He had no answers. The pattern had begun. By the end of the 1930s, at least 6 people had chosen to end their own suffering within the walls of the Cecil Hotel. The building was earning a new nickname among locals. They started calling it the Suicide. Newspapers began mentioning it in their reports. A hotel on Main Street. A hotel on 6th Street. Sometimes they'd name it directly. The Cecil Hotel. Each time the reputation grew darker. The marble lobby still gleamed. The stained glass still caught the light. But beneath the surface, something was changing. The building that was supposed to represent hope and prosperity had become a place where hope went to disappear. And then came World War II. Young men in uniform passed through Los Angeles on their way to the Pacific. Some of them stayed at the Cecil. In January 1938, Marine Corps fireman Roy Thompson, 35 years old, took what police called a suicide leap from the 14th floor. His body was found on the skylight of a building behind the hotel. He left no note. In May 1939, Navy officer Irwin Neblett, 39 years old, was found unconscious in his room. He had ingested strychnine poison. He died shortly after being discovered. The sealed letter he left was sent to his family unopened. In January 1940, a teacher named Dorothy Seiger, 45 years old, was found having swallowed poison. She died the next day. But not every story from that time was dark. In 1940, a man named Glenn traveled to Los Angeles specifically to get sober. He checked into the Cecil Hotel and found his way to a local Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. What he discovered there changed his life. He went on to help establish the first West Coast chapter of AA, and the very first public meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous on the West Coast was held in the mezzanine level of the Cecil Hotel. In the same building where so many had lost their battles with despair, others were finding a community of support, a path toward recovery. It was proof that even in darkness, light could exist. But the light was flickering, and the darkness was growing stronger. The 1940s marked both the peak and the beginning of the end for the Cecil Hotel. It still functioned as a fashionable destination, still attracted respectable guests. But the cracks were showing. Downtown Los Angeles was changing in ways that couldn't be reversed. The city itself was spreading outward, becoming less centralized. The automobile was king now, and people no longer needed to stay near railway terminals. Suburbs were growing. Shopping centers were opening in places like Beverly Hills and Pasadena. The downtown core that had once been the beating heart of Los Angeles was losing its pulse. In 1939, Union Station opened to the north, moving the main railway terminus away from Main Street. The hotel lost one of its biggest advantages, that convenient connection to travelers arriving by train. Then, in 1950, the Pacific Electric Building closed as a terminus, another transportation hub gone. At the same time, businesses were leaving downtown entirely, relocating to other parts of Southern California. The Spring Street Financial District, once filled with bankers and businessmen who needed convenient hotel rooms, was emptying out. Banks moved west. Law firms followed. The theaters on Broadway began to struggle. Department stores that had anchored downtown for decades started closing or moving to suburban malls. Without convenient transportation and without the business travelers it was designed for, the Cecil Hotel had to accept a new reality. It was becoming a residence for people on the margins. By the 1950s, the hotel had a reputation as a place for transients. Within a 4-mile radius, nearly 10,000 homeless people lived on the streets. Skid Row had fully formed, and the Cecil Hotel sat right at its edge. Then came the 1940s case that would haunt the hotel for decades. In 1944, a 19-year-old woman named Dorothy Jean Purcell checked into the Cecil with her 38-year-old boyfriend, Ben Levine. She had no idea she was pregnant. One night, she went into labor in their room. Not wanting to wake her boyfriend, she went to the communal bathroom to give birth alone. When the baby came, she believed it was stillborn. Panicked, confused, in unimaginable pain, she made a choice that would follow her forever. She threw the infant out of the window onto the roof of the building next door. The baby was found the next morning. Dorothy was arrested. At trial, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. The court ruled she had been mentally confused, but the story became another dark chapter in the hotel's growing legend. A place where tragedy seemed to find people, no matter who they were or why they had come. And the deaths didn't stop. In November 1947, a 35-year-old man named Robert Smith fell from a 7th-floor window. In October 1954, a woman who checked in under the name Margaret Brown jumped from the 7th floor and landed on the hotel's marquee on busy Main Street. Hundreds of people gathered to watch as firemen tried to retrieve her body. One witness became so hysterical she had to be hospitalized. Later, police identified the woman as 55-year-old Helen Gurnee. In February 1962, Julia Frances Moore, 50 years old, jumped from an 8th-floor window into a 2nd-story light well. She left no note. Just a bus ticket from St. Louis, 59 cents in change, and an Illinois bank book showing she had $1,800 in her account. Then came October 12, 1962. A date that would produce one of the strangest and most tragic incidents in the hotel's history. Pauline Otten, 27 years old, was in a room on the 9th floor with her estranged husband, Dewey. They had been arguing about their marriage. Dewey had come to her workplace earlier that day, asking for reconciliation. She agreed to talk at the hotel, but the conversation turned bitter. Finally, Dewey decided he'd had enough. He told her he was going out to get dinner. He left. Pauline sat alone in that room, staring out the window at the city below, and she made a choice. She climbed out the window and jumped. 9 stories down. On the sidewalk below, a 65-year-old man named George Giannini was walking past the hotel. He never saw her coming. Pauline landed directly on top of him. Both of them died instantly. Police first thought it might have been a suicide pact, but when investigators examined George's body, they noticed something odd. His shoes were still on his feet. If he had jumped from 9 stories, the impact would have knocked his shoes off. The truth was simpler and more horrible. George Giannini had just been walking down the street. He was minding his own business, and in the last moments of Pauline Otten's life, her final act was to accidentally kill an innocent man. Then there was Goldie. Her full name was Goldie Osgood, but everyone called her Pigeon Goldie. She was a retired telephone operator who had lived at the Cecil Hotel for 5 years. Every day she would walk to Pershing Square to feed the pigeons. She was gentle, kind, a familiar face in the neighborhood. On June 4th, 1964, friends saw her in the afternoon, smiling and talking. Just minutes later, someone delivering telephone directories found her in her hotel room. She had been raped, stabbed, and beaten. Her room had been ransacked. Flowers appeared on the curb in Pershing Square the next day. Her friends left them there, mourning the woman who had shown kindness to the smallest creatures. Police arrested a man named Jacques Eilinger after finding him walking nearby with blood-stained clothing, but he was later cleared. Pigeon Goldie's murder was never solved. To this day, no one knows who killed the gentle woman who fed the birds. By the 1960s and 70s, the Cecil Hotel had become something it was never meant to be. It was a place where people checked in when they had nowhere else to go, where rooms cost almost nothing and no one asked questions, where you could disappear if you wanted to, and that anonymity, that lack of scrutiny, began to attract a different kind of guest. Not just the desperate, not just the lonely, but the dangerous. In the 1980s, a man checked into a room on the 14th floor. He was thin, dark-haired, and paid $14 per night. His name was Richard Ramirez, though the world would come to know him by another name: the Night Stalker. Between 1984 and 1985, Ramirez terrorized Southern California. He would break into homes at night and commit unspeakable acts of violence. 13 people were murdered. Many more were brutally assaulted. The entire region lived in fear. And between his crimes, Richard Ramirez would return to the Cecil Hotel. He would walk through the lobby, sometimes shirtless, sometimes with blood on his skin. Other residents noticed but said nothing. At a place like the Cecil, people minded their own business. You didn't ask where someone had been or what they'd been doing. According to one report, Ramirez may have committed 14 murders while living at the hotel. He used it as his home base, his refuge, the place where he felt safe. Kenneth Givens, a longtime resident, later said that in the 80s, he would never go higher than the 6th floor. The upper floors of the Cecil, he explained, were where people got killed. Once someone got you in a room, they might rob you, beat you, and throw you out the window. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. The Cecil had become a place where violence was expected. On August 30th, 1985, Richard Ramirez made a mistake. He was spotted in the street by a group of Los Angeles residents who recognized him from news reports. They chased him down and held him until police arrived. He was arrested, tried, convicted of 13 murders, and sentenced to death. He would die of cancer in prison in 2013, but his connection to the Cecil Hotel became part of the building's mythology. A serial killer had lived there, had slept there, had walked those halls, and no one had stopped him. Then, in 1991, another serial killer checked into the Cecil Hotel. His name was Jack Unterweger, an Austrian journalist and convicted murderer who had been released from prison after a public campaign argued he'd been rehabilitated. He came to Los Angeles to write articles about crime and prostitution for an Austrian magazine. He was even invited by the Los Angeles Police Department to ride along on patrols through the red light district. It was the perfect cover. During his 5 weeks at the Cecil Hotel, Unterweger strangled and killed at least 3 women: Shannon Exley, Irene Rodriguez, Peggy Booth. He managed to remove their bodies from the building without being seen. Later, he was convicted in Austria. Before he could be transferred to serve his sentence, he took his own life in a Miami jail cell. Some investigators believe Unterweger chose the Cecil Hotel specifically because he wanted to copy Richard Ramirez, that he saw the hotel as a place where killers could operate freely. Whether that's true or not, the pattern was undeniable. For decades, the Cecil Hotel had been a magnet for tragedy, and by the 2000s, that reputation had spread far beyond Los Angeles. The hotel tried to rebrand itself. In 2011, part of the building was converted into a hostel called Stay on Main. It was meant to attract young budget travelers, backpackers looking for cheap accommodation in downtown LA. The management created separate reception areas, bright orange cushions, and a more modern vibe. But underneath the fresh paint and new name, it was still the Cecil Hotel. The same building, the same history, the same dark energy that seemed to cling to the walls. And that's when Elisa Lam arrived. She was 21 years old, a student at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. She had been struggling with bipolar disorder for years and was open about it on her blog, which she called Ether Fields. In her posts, she wrote about fashion, about her life, about the mental health challenges that sometimes made her feel utterly directionless and lost. In January 2013, she decided to take a solo trip down the West Coast. Her parents were worried about her traveling alone, but she promised to call them every single day. She wanted this adventure. She needed it. On January 26th, she arrived in Los Angeles by Amtrak train from San Diego. She checked into the Cecil Hotel, booking a bed in a hostel-style shared room. The hotel was cheap, centrally located, and convenient. She planned to spend a few days exploring the city before heading north to Santa Cruz. But within 48 hours, something went wrong. The guests sharing Elisa's room began complaining to management. They said her behavior was odd, unsettling. She would leave handwritten notes on their beds that said things like, "Go home and go away." She locked the door to the room and required a password for entry. The hotel manager, Amy Price, made the decision to move Elisa to a private room on the same floor. That was the last time anyone from the hotel staff saw her. Over the next few days, Elisa was seen in various places around Los Angeles. She visited a bookstore called The Last Bookstore, where the manager remembered her as friendly and enthusiastic. She attended a live taping of the Conan O'Brien show in Burbank, but was escorted out by security for disruptive behavior. Friends and family members later said that Elisa sometimes stopped taking her medications. When that happened, she would experience hallucinations, paranoia, and extreme mood swings. She had even been hospitalized in the past for similar episodes. On January 31st, Elisa was scheduled to check out of the Cecil Hotel and continue her journey to Santa Cruz. But she never checked out. She never called her parents. When they didn't hear from her on February 1st, they immediately contacted the Los Angeles Police Department. Officers arrived at the hotel and searched her room. All of her belongings were still there. Her wallet, her identification, her laptop, everything except Elisa. Police brought in search dogs and combed through the building from top to bottom, including the roof. The dogs couldn't pick up her scent beyond the hallways. On February 6th, police decided they needed more help. They released flyers with Elisa's photograph and a physical description. They asked the public for tips. The case began to gain attention through local media. Then, on February 13th, nearly 2 weeks after Elisa disappeared, the police made a decision that would change everything. They released security camera footage from inside one of the hotel's elevators. The video was filmed on January 31st, the day Elisa was last seen. It showed her entering the elevator and pressing multiple buttons. The elevator doors didn't close. She stepped out into the hallway, looked left and right as if searching for someone or hiding from something. She stepped back into the elevator and pressed herself into the corner. Then she stepped out again, this time making strange hand gestures, moving her arms in odd patterns, as if having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. The doors still didn't close. Finally, she walked away, and the elevator doors shut. The video lasted approximately 2.5 minutes, but those minutes would be watched millions of times. The footage was haunting, disturbing, impossible to explain for those who didn't understand what they were seeing. Within hours, it went viral across every social media platform. Reddit threads exploded with theories. YouTube channels dedicated entire videos to analyzing every frame. Twitter users shared and reshared the clip. Facebook groups formed specifically to discuss the case. Millions of people around the world watched the video, many of them repeatedly, searching for clues that might explain what happened to this young woman. Online sleuths began dissecting every frame. Conspiracy theories exploded. Some said she was being chased by a ghost. Others claimed she was possessed. Some believed there was a killer hiding just off camera. People analyzed her hand movements, claiming they matched rituals from paranormal games. Others connected the case to a horror film called Dark Water, which featured a similar plot. The theories grew more elaborate, more bizarre. The internet became obsessed with Elisa Lam and the Cecil Hotel. Meanwhile, guests at the hotel began complaining about the water. It tasted strange. It smelled foul. The pressure was weak. On February 19th, a maintenance worker was sent to the roof to investigate. He climbed the 10-foot ladder attached to one of the 4 large water tanks. He opened the heavy lid and looked inside. And there she was. Elisa Lam's body, naked, floating face up in the water. For nearly 3 weeks, hotel guests had been drinking, bathing, and brushing their teeth with water from a tank that held a dead body. The police investigation intensified. The autopsy was performed on February 21st. At first, the coroner ruled the cause of death as undetermined. There was no evidence of trauma, no signs of physical violence, no drugs or alcohol in her system. But toxicology tests revealed that she had not been taking the full dosage of her bipolar medication. 4 months later, in June, the Los Angeles County coroner issued a final ruling. Elisa Lam's death was accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant factor. The theory was that she had experienced a psychotic episode. She had hallucinated that she was in danger. She had somehow accessed the roof through a locked door with an alarm that should have alerted staff, but didn't. She climbed the 10-foot ladder. She opened the heavy water tank lid. She got inside. And once in the water, she couldn't get back out. The elevator video that had sparked so much speculation was later explained more simply. Investigators realized that when Elisa pressed multiple buttons, she had accidentally pressed the door hold button, which kept the doors open for 2 minutes. Her strange behavior, the hand gestures, the hiding, all of it was consistent with someone experiencing hallucinations and paranoia. There was no ghost, no killer, no conspiracy. Just a young woman suffering from a mental health crisis, far from home, in a building that had witnessed more than its share of tragedy. Her parents filed a lawsuit against the hotel, but it was dismissed in 2015. Other guests who had stayed at the hotel during those weeks also sued. The case was eventually closed, but the story never really ended. The Netflix docuseries that premiered in February 2021 brought renewed attention to Elisa Lam's death and the Cecil Hotel's dark history. It also highlighted something troubling: the way the internet had turned her tragedy into entertainment. One man, a musician who went by the name Morbid, was falsely accused by online sleuths of being involved in Elisa's death. He received death threats. His social media accounts were destroyed. He nearly ended his own life because of the harassment. Later, hard evidence proved he had been in Mexico when Elisa was at the Cecil Hotel. He was completely innocent. But the damage was done. The documentary revealed a painful truth. When people turned Elisa Lam's death into a mystery to solve, they forgot she was a real person, a daughter, a friend, someone whose family was left to grieve while the world turned her final moments into a viral sensation. After Elisa Lam's death, the Cecil Hotel tried to move forward. In 2014, it was sold to a New York City hotelier named Richard Bourne for $30 million. Another firm, Simon Barron Development, acquired a 99-year ground lease on the property. The president of Simon Barron, Matt Barron, announced that while his company was committed to preserving the architecturally and historically significant components of the building, particularly the grand lobby with its marble and stained glass, they planned to completely redevelop the interior. The building had suffered from what he called hodgepodge work over the years, quick fixes and cheap renovations that hadn't addressed underlying problems. The new owners announced ambitious plans. They envisioned a mixed-use development with modern hotel rooms, residential units, and amenities like a rooftop pool, gym, and lounge. They wanted to honor the building's history while transforming it into something that could thrive in 21st century Los Angeles. The project was supposed to be completed by 2019. It was a massive undertaking, requiring the kind of investment and vision that matched the original 1924 construction. In February 2017, the Los Angeles City Council voted to designate the Cecil as a historic cultural monument. The designation recognized the hotel as representative of early 20th century American hotel development, with its Beaux Arts architecture and its connection to the city's growth during that era. The Cecil Hotel officially became a protected landmark, which meant that any future changes would have to respect its historical significance. The hotel closed for renovations later that year, and for the first time in nearly a century, the building stood empty. No guests, no residents, just construction workers and architects trying to figure out how to transform a structure weighted down by so much history. But then the world changed. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe. Construction projects stopped. Businesses closed. The renovations at the Cecil Hotel were suspended indefinitely. The building sat empty, silent, a ghost of its former self. On December 13, 2021, the Cecil Hotel reopened, but not as a hotel, not as apartments. It was converted into affordable housing operated by the Skid Row Housing Trust. 600 units were made available for low-income residents, many of them formerly homeless individuals from the surrounding area. It was meant to be a new chapter, a chance for redemption, a way to turn the building's dark history into something positive. But the transition was rocky. In August 2023, the Los Angeles Times published a report about conditions inside the Cecil. Residents described black mold growing on walls, vermin infestations, water leaking from ceilings, graffiti and vandalism throughout the building, unsanitary communal areas. The people living there, many of whom needed ongoing medical care, mental health support, and substance abuse treatment, were struggling. The building that had once been a symbol of promise in the 1920s, that had become a symbol of tragedy over the decades, was now a symbol of how difficult it is to help those most in need. In March 2024, the property was listed for sale again. The 99-year lease was offered to potential buyers, along with the building and land assessed at around $31 million. As of now, its future remains uncertain. The Cecil Hotel stands at a crossroads, just as it always has, between hope and despair, between history and renewal, between the people who lived and died within its walls and the city that surrounds it. But here's what we know for certain. At least 16 people, possibly many more, met tragic ends at the Cecil Hotel. Some through their own desperation, some through violence, some through circumstances that remain unexplained. 2 notorious serial killers called it home. Countless others passed through its doors on their way to somewhere else, or to nowhere at all. The building has been featured in television shows, documentaries, and endless online discussions. It inspired an entire season of American Horror Story. It became a location people visited, not because they wanted to stay there, but because they were fascinated by the darkness that seemed to cling to every floor, every hallway, every room. And yet, for all the death and tragedy, there were also moments of light. The first West Coast chapter of Alcoholics Anonymous was founded by someone who found hope at the Cecil Hotel. Families lived there for decades, raising children, building lives. Workers showed up every day to keep the place running. People survived there. Some even thrived. The hotel manager, Amy Price, worked there for 10 years. She saw approximately 80 deaths during that time, but she also saw community, resilience, and moments of unexpected kindness. The Cecil Hotel is not just a place of horror. It's a place where human beings, in all their complexity, have lived out their stories. So what explains it? Why did so many terrible things happen in one building? Some people believe the hotel is cursed, that there's something supernatural about the place, some dark force that draws tragedy like a magnet. Others point to more practical explanations. The location, right at the edge of Skid Row, an area marked by poverty, addiction, mental illness, and crime. The cheap rates that attracted vulnerable people. The lack of security and oversight that made it easy for dangerous individuals to hide. The transient nature of the guests, many of whom had no family or friends keeping track of them. The fact that it was 14 stories tall, giving people access to windows and roofs if they wanted to escape their pain. All of these factors combined to create the perfect storm. But perhaps the simplest explanation is this. The Cecil Hotel is a mirror. It reflects the city around it. When Los Angeles was booming in the 1920s, the hotel was beautiful and full of promise. When the Depression crushed the economy, the hotel declined. When Skid Row formed and society's most vulnerable were pushed into the shadows, the hotel became their shelter and sometimes their final resting place. The Cecil didn't create the darkness. It absorbed it. The building holds 99 years of stories. Some of them end in tragedy. Some of them end in survival. Some of them are still being written. If you visit downtown Los Angeles today and walk down Main Street, you'll see the Cecil Hotel still standing. The old signs are gone, whitewashed over in 2022, removing the historic advertisement that had been painted on the building since at least 1927. The marble lobby that once gleamed with promise is hidden behind security doors. The stained glass that Loy Lester Smith designed nearly 100 years ago still catches the light. But few people see it anymore. The building that cost over $1 million to construct, that opened with such hope on December 20th, 1924, is now home to people the city has struggled to help in any other way. And Loy Lester Smith, the architect who drew those beautiful plans, who wanted to create something elegant and lasting, died in 1956. He never saw what his building would become. He never knew that his name would forever be linked to one of the most infamous locations in American history. The story of the Cecil Hotel is not a simple one. It's not just about ghosts or curses or conspiracy theories. It's about what happens when a society fails to care for its most vulnerable. It's about mental illness, poverty, addiction, and the way those issues concentrate in certain places. It's about the internet age, where tragedy becomes entertainment and people forget that real families are grieving behind the viral videos. It's about architecture and intention, about how a building designed for one purpose can be transformed by time and circumstance into something completely different. It's about Los Angeles itself, a city of dreams where not everyone's dreams come true. The Cecil Hotel will always be known as the place where Elisa Lam died, where Richard Ramirez lived, where Goldie Osgood was murdered, where Pauline Otten jumped and killed a man below, where Percy Orman Cook wrote that money couldn't buy happiness before ending his suffering. Those stories are real. Those people were real. And their deaths, whether by their own choice, by violence, or by accident, deserve to be remembered with dignity. But the building itself is just a building. 14 stories of concrete and steel and fading paint. It doesn't kill people. It doesn't curse them. It simply stands there, a witness to human nature in all its beauty and darkness. And as long as it stands, people will tell stories about it. Some true, some exaggerated, some invented entirely. Because that's what we do with places like this. We make them legendary. We turn them into symbols. But if the Cecil Hotel could speak, maybe it would say this: I was built to shelter people, to give them a place to rest, to sleep, to dream. I was supposed to be a beginning, not an ending. I have held both joy and sorrow within these walls. I have seen the best and worst of what people can be. And I am still here, still standing, still waiting to see what comes next. The question is not what haunts the Cecil Hotel. The question is what haunts us. What draws us to these stories of tragedy and mystery? What makes us watch elevator videos of a young woman in crisis and turn it into a puzzle to solve? What makes us forget that behind every statistic, every true crime documentary, every viral video, there are real people whose lives mattered, whose deaths deserve respect, whose families carry grief that never really ends? The Cecil Hotel is a reminder, not of ghosts or curses, but of our shared responsibility to care for one another, to recognize mental illness and treat it, to see the vulnerable and help them, to build cities where everyone has a safe place to call home, to remember that every building, every street, every neighborhood reflects the choices we make as a society. The Cecil Hotel didn't become the Hotel Death because of supernatural forces. It became that way because we, collectively, allowed certain people to slip through the cracks, and some of them ended up on Main Street, in a building that was supposed to be a symbol of progress, trying to survive one more night. That's the real story of the Cecil Hotel. Not a haunted house, not a cursed building, but a place where humanity, in all its pain and resilience, has left its mark. The building itself, designed by Loy Lester Smith with such care and attention in the Beaux Arts tradition, was meant to be a symbol of progress and prosperity. Its marble lobby was supposed to welcome successful businessmen. Its stained glass windows were meant to catch the morning light and inspire hope in guests starting their day. The 14 stories were supposed to represent upward mobility, the American dream reaching toward the sky. But architecture cannot control human destiny. Buildings do not determine what happens within their walls. They simply provide the stage. And the Cecil Hotel became a stage for some of the darkest moments in Los Angeles history. Not because there was something wrong with the building itself, but because of where it stood and who it served. The same E-shaped floor plan that allowed natural ventilation also created isolated corridors where people could disappear. The same height that made it impressive also made it dangerous for those who sought to escape their pain by jumping. The same affordable rates that made it accessible to working people also made it accessible to those with nowhere else to go. Every design choice that seemed positive could also become something darker when circumstances changed, and circumstances always change. The hotel that opened in the midst of the Roaring '20s, when Los Angeles was experiencing unprecedented growth and optimism, could not have predicted the Great Depression just 5 years away. The developers who invested $2.5 million total into the project believed they were building something that would last for generations, that would be profitable and prestigious. They were right about one thing. It did last for generations, but not in the way they imagined. The Cecil Hotel has now stood for a century, 100 years of watching Los Angeles transform around it. It has outlived its architect, who died in 1956 at age 70, buried in Bakersfield, probably never imagining that his most famous work would become synonymous with death rather than elegance. And as long as we remember the people who lived and died there, as long as we learn from what happened within those walls, their stories will mean something. They will matter. And maybe, just maybe, the next chapter will be different. The Cecil Hotel teaches us that places are not just locations on a map. They are repositories of memory, witnesses to history, physical manifestations of social forces we often prefer to ignore. When we walk past a building like the Cecil, it's easy to see only the facade, the paint peeling or fresh, the windows dark or lit. But every building tells a story about the society that created it and the society that sustained it or failed to sustain it. The Cecil was born in optimism and descended into tragedy not because of supernatural forces, but because of very real economic pressures, social abandonment, and systemic failures to address mental health, poverty, and addiction. When the Great Depression hit, the city's response was not to create more support for those who were struggling, but to push them into concentrated areas like Skid Row. When mental health care was inadequate, people like Elisa Lam traveled alone without the support systems that might have saved them. When housing became unaffordable, people ended up in places like the Cecil because they had nowhere else to go. The building absorbed all of this. It became a physical manifestation of society's shadow, the place where we put the problems we didn't want to see or solve. And now, as it transforms once again into affordable housing, the Cecil faces perhaps its greatest test. Can a building with such a dark history become a place of healing and hope? Can the same marble lobby that welcomed Percy Orman Cook in 1927 now welcome formerly homeless individuals and offer them a chance at stability? Can the rooms where so much pain unfolded become homes where people rebuild their lives? The answer depends not on the building itself, but on the support, resources, and compassion provided to those who live there. A building cannot heal people, but it can shelter them while they heal themselves. And perhaps that is the ultimate redemption for the Cecil Hotel, to return to its original purpose of providing shelter, but this time with greater awareness of the responsibility that entails and the support that requires.